Okay. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much. We're getting the call for seats back in the room. Thank you for joining us today in this session. I'm Ashley Cooper. I'm one of the deputy managing editors at The Lancet, and I'm going to be moderating today's panel session. So in this session, we're going to lean into the theme of the conference in a slightly different way to what we've heard about so far. So our panel are going to discuss the myths and common misconceptions that exist around their roles and about the process of publishing and how in their roles they help to prevent the publication of misinformation. So I'm going to take a couple of minutes to briefly introduce our panelists so that you can better understand their perspectives when we have this discussion. So in the room, we have Alaya Astudillo, a medical editor based in London, UK. Her career includes 13 years at the Lancet Journals, primarily as deputy managing editor, where she oversaw post-acceptance processes and trained assistant editors to edit papers across all Lancet titles. So I think that's a very clear conflict of interest if you needed any more indication of that. She's currently freelance with recent roles including papers editors for the Bulletin at the World Health Organization, medical editor at Doctors Without Borders, and consultant editor for the Pan American Health Organization. Also in the room, we have Yatin Joshi, a freelance copy editor based in India. He's been copy editing technical documents for more than 35 years, a career change he made after working for a decade as a scientist with the Indian Council of Agricultural Research. Yatin currently provides copy editing services for European Science Editing Journal, and in addition to copy editing, Yatin runs training programs for academics on writing research papers both in India and abroad. Online, we have Dr. Veronique Gabala, a peer review editor based in Berlin, Germany. Veronique has worked for the Nature suite of journals for almost 8 years, starting as an associate editor at Nature Communications. For the past 5 years, she's been senior editor at Nature, where her areas of responsibility include biology, stem cells, and mechanobiology. Prior to her work at Nature, Veronique was a postdoctoral research fellow at Max Delbruck Center in Berlin. So thank you to my panelists for joining me today. And now that I've introduced the panel, I'm also just going to take a minute to define the groups that we're going to be speaking about, because as we know, the same terms can mean very different things when we're talking about job roles in editing. So when we speak, or when the panel speaks about pre-acceptance editors today, we're going to mean editors who conduct peer review and those who help authors to write and prepare papers before submission. When we're going to talk about post-acceptance editors, we mean those who edit papers after they've been accepted by the journal for publication. So that means either in-house or as vendor suppliers. And when we talk about manuscript editor, we're going to be referring to technical and copy editors. Like all the other panel sessions today, please save your questions until the end, and I encourage a lively discussion, so keep all of your thoughts and we'll have them later. Okay, so before I launch into my questions, I have to thank Shaharima from the previous session because you set up my first question perfectly. Thank you very much. Because you mentioned some misconceptions about open access journals and about librarians and their roles from researchers and authors. So to the panel, what myth would you like to dispel about the process of submitting or publishing a paper? Veronique, I'll start with you, if that's okay.
Yes, can you hear me okay?
We can, yeah.
Perfect. Yes, sure. So, when thinking about this question, I think the answer that very obviously came to my mind is actually that I think in particular authors put a lot of importance and they're right in the writing of their paper, right? In the writing style and in the formatting. But I think there's a misconception there about the importance that this has in our decision. So me as a peer review editors, how this will influence my decision to either reject a paper or to send it out for peer review. Of course, good writing will help delivering the content of the paper very effectively and will make our job as editors easier. But at the end of the day, what we really focus on at this stage is the content of the paper. So what are the key conclusions? Are they novel and impactful enough to be published in our journal? And then the data itself, does it support the claims? And is this sufficient to support the claims? So bottom line, writing is important. It does help. It does help us editors in this first step, but it will never tip the balance between a decision to reject or a decision to have the paper reviewed. This is the first major misconception that I wanted to raise. The second one is about another item that is included in the submission and that people often overlook, which is the cover letter. I think here, this is the opposite. Authors, I think, underestimate the importance of the cover letter and in particular, the importance of its writing. Because most of the time we just receive cover letters that are just a repetition of the abstract, but they're actually a place where the authors can express the enthusiasm in their own words. And the writing is actually extremely important because you want to, to get to the editor to really pass a clear message and to pass your enthusiasm for your research and make them understand why you feel that their work is a good fit for the journal. So that would be then, the second misconception that I think is out there regarding, the importance of writing in our assessment of papers.
Yeah, fantastic. I don't think we're the first panel to be advocating for cover letters coming back in or improved cover letters. So this is great. We're on theme already. Yatin and Alaya, would you agree? What else would you like to bring up?
Yes and no.
Oh, good debate already.
In fact, the first part of when she started, that gave me pause because my take is slightly different. But I also noticed that she said step 2. So step 2, as she said, it depends on the substantive content of your paper, not so much how well it is written or how well it is formatted. But there is a preliminary screening. And most journals first want to decide quickly, I would call this a qualifying round, whether the manuscript is good enough to be sent out for review in the first place. So authors first have to clear that hurdle, that they need to convince in a very short time those who are going to do this screening that their manuscript is good enough to be sent out for reviewing. Now, who does that and what do they do? Now, obviously, it can't be on the substantive content because that's why they need reviewers. So if the substantive content is going to be judged by reviewers, but your manuscript has to go to the reviewers in the first place. And that is where I said that the myth is that acceptance or rejection solely depends on substantive content. That is what I want to say. No, that's a myth. It is that comes later. Because it's, after all, especially we are talking of journals, say Nature has a very high rejection rate, which means they want to say no as quickly and as cheaply as possible. Now, it's very easy to outsource this job to somebody who doesn't really have to know about substantive content. For instance, let's say they take a look at the way the references are formatted. And if they are not in the style that journal wants, it's very easy to simply say, no, we're sorry. The references are not in the line what we need. The same thing goes for simple things like how it is formatted, whether it, to what extent it follows the journal style, and so on. On the other hand, when she then went on to mention covering letter, I was happy because that is something I keep telling authors, that you might think it's very easy and very quick to copy the abstract and paste it into your covering letter. But that is not something that you need to do. You need to bring out what is the problem to which your manuscript offers a solution, or what is the exact gap in knowledge that your manuscript hopes to fill. And if you can do that, that is essential. It's also nice to say a few things about why you want to publish in that particular journal. That's what I assume editors would like to hear. So these are the 2 myths I wanted to talk about.
Okay, another vote for cover letters. I'm on board. Allow you help some authors prepare their papers. Do you agree? Do you have another myth?
It was more, and it goes a little bit with this. I feel like journals like Lancet or Nature, they have this post-acceptance editing process, which they know that if a paper is not very well written as accepted, it's going to be changed so much that at the end it's going to be a really good paper. So they have the privilege to be able to accept a paper where maybe the author is not, English is not their first language, so it could be a little bit less well written. So in a way, the language is, maybe could be changed in some journals. As we've seen, the process changes so much by journals that we've seen at this conference. And I think for me, this is more the myth is like, they probably expect that all the journals work the same way and the process is the same, but it changes so much from one journal to the other. Some have the post-acceptance editing, some don't. So I think the best and the safest way is to make sure that the paper, when you submit it, it has all the qualities that it needs to have for later on not be completely disappointed and traumatized by the process. Because I mean, my experience with authors is that generally they don't, not only when they publish in a Nature or Lancet, they don't expect the post-acceptance. So once the paper is accepted, it's not going to be published exactly like that. It's going to change a lot because they're going to be editing it, as we were doing at the time, really intensely. They're going to be looking for all the things that we were talking about, inclusive language, spinning, and everything. So it's going to change so much. They don't expect that, but they also might not expect the revision stage at peer review, how long it takes and how much a paper is changed at that moment too. So my role as a pre-submission manuscript editor is to kind of help them prepare the paper in a way that those changes are minimum as well for all the process, and also explain to them what the process is for every, I don't know what the process is for every journal, but kind of explain that it changes. And I try to look online, whatever journal we're planning to submit, and see what kind of processes they have themselves. So I think that would be it more or less.
Okay, so that the paper isn't going to be published exactly as it's submitted, but be in the best shape possible.
Yeah, and that each journal has different processes.
Okay, fantastic. Okay,
Can
so
I
moving on.
Sorry, I just wanted to react to what Yatin and Elias said, to say that, and this is something that we'll, I think, come back with in later question, is that there's differences between journals in the process, and there it is actually important to understand the journal that is targeted, because, for example, this whole importance on of the content versus the format. I think, and the screening that may happen in some journals, this will vary a lot from journal to journal. So just to clarify why we may also have different views on the process and see also different myths there. I think it's also a very journal dependent thing.
Yeah, so the myth would be that not all journals are the same. I like it. Shocking, I know. So moving on about misconceptions about the process, can we now talk about what common misconception you encounter about your role as an editor? Yatin, would you like to lead?
Yeah. In fact, the common misconception is that a copy editor focuses only on spelling, grammar, punctuation, usage, style. If that is what copy editors do, well, it's time because their days are numbered. Because we have software that is far better at ensuring consistency, at checking spelling, and so on. So in that case, what else does a copy editor do? And as Veronique mentioned, it's to do with writing. The author knows his or her content, but might not have expressed it the way it's most easily accessible to readers. And that is a substantial contribution language editors can make, that they can make language more concise, more clear. It also has pitfalls, because if your paper is too clear, it's very easy to see through it and see that the content isn't substantive enough. But more than that, let's say there are papers that have tables in them, that have data. So copy editors check whether in fact the text matches the contents of the table, whether the table itself is properly presented. Now, one very common thing that I notice in the manuscript that I copy edit for some reason, left alignment of columns seems to be a kind of default. And which is really weird, because if you are talking about numbers that share common units, how can they be left aligned? Because in that case, units won't match up with units, tens won't match up with tens, hundreds won't match up with tens. So you can't really see at a glance the difference in magnitude. Even more surprising, when there was a sample shown at a website of a journal, and it showed all the columns were left aligned. And when I queried, I was told that no, it really looks much nicer that way. That is something that I think copy editors should not accept, that it needs to be judged on the numbers. So that's the myth I wanted to say, that if we just don't focus on spelling, grammar, and punctuation, would we get into it, try to understand what the author is saying, see if it can be said better, it can be said in clearer terms, it can be said briefly.
I wholeheartedly agree. I think at the Lancet as well, a myth that people have is that we're going to interrogate your data. At the post-acceptance stage, we're going to check that your tables represent your text well and clearly. I think that's one of our key principles in our team, is that the science is correct and that your data is reported accurately. So I agree. Alaya.
Yeah, it's almost, they call it a second peer review process where you're really rechecking every single thing. For me, it's more as a pre-submission manuscript editor, it's more about that there's a little bit of a gray line as to what your role is. There can be a gray line. So it's very important to set it up from the beginning and to make it very clear what your role is within this manuscript. Because at the end of the day, these authors are going to be the authors of the paper. They are the experts in the field, and their name is going to be is their paper. But often, because you're working on a very early stage of a paper, you're rewriting things, you're changing orders to make sure that the story is properly explained, that the research question is properly explained, that it's very clear what the novelty, if there is novelty about the findings, etc. So you are really helping the authors reshape the manuscript. So it's very important to make it very clear that your role is only about the story and how you're telling it and the language used, and their role is to really explain the novelty, what do we already know on the subjects. They are the experts in the field, so they sometimes would expect me to know this, especially I work in so many different fields in medical specialties, so I don't know most of the things, but I can ask them, I can tell them, this is what you should say in this sentence, what you should explain in this sentence. So it's about, making it very clear what my role is within the editing of this manuscript. Yeah, I think that's it.
Okay. What do they expect you to do if not that?
Sometimes they ask me to, okay, say, for example, in an introduction, I say, here you have to say what's important about what you're looking at. And they're like, okay, yeah, write the sentence, write it yourself. And I'm like, okay, or I say, I need more references, more studies to show what we already know on this. And they ask me to go and look for those references. And I like, no, those references, those studies, so sometimes it's a little bit difficult because I am quite involved in the paper, really. So it does make sense. That would expect me to kind of know.
Yeah, okay.
But yeah, these kind of things. So it's very important to make it very clear from the beginning. I'm here just as a technical editor, and I will ask you a lot of questions. I will put a lot of comments, and you will have to give me those answers. And they're very happy to. But,
yeah, okay.
Just to make it clear.
Okay. I wonder if a freelance...
I just wanted to
Yeah,
add
please.
In fact, that's what makes, since I copy edit some of the papers that are submitted to European Science Editing, and I would like to mention that what makes it so rewarding is that it's very, very rarely that you don't understand what is being talked about.
I like that. That's a privileged position. I was just thinking, I wonder if the freelance editors, your roles are often misunderstood a little bit more than someone who works for a big publisher like Nature. Veronique, what would you say the most common misconception is about your role?
Yeah, I think it's a bit related to the first points that we already discussed. I think many authors view us peer review editors as people that, just shuffle manuscript around, make quick decisions, count votes from reviewers, but you actually, just attach importance to the abstract, just make decisions on the abstract. But we actually do get involved, like Olaya herself when she edits paper. We get involved a lot in the papers, and we dive deep into its content and the science. And this is, and also, when we make decisions based on peer review reports, we will really consider carefully the scientific arguments that are being made and not just count votes. I have 2 thumbs up, 1 thumb down, and so this can go forward. So, for example, also in the first decision, again, it may vary between journals, but then I think it's important to know that not all journals function this way. We don't make decisions, at least in the Nature portfolio, just based on the abstract. So the abstract is important, its writing is important, but more once the paper is published, so that a potential reader can have a quick view of the content of the paper and decide whether to read the paper or not. But for us, for our decision, for example, the abstract has very little importance. So I think this would be the common misconception, that we just move things around, maybe focus, just look at the packaging, and don't really dive deep into the content.
But so how do you then dispel that myth, though? Is it once people have published with you, they'll come back and they understand the process, or do you work on addressing that beforehand?
Sure. So this is, of course, through their own experience, right? And then I think we'll talk about it in more length later. It's also about us editors in events like today or others, communicating about our processes and how we handle papers.
Okay, fantastic.
Yeah, and I was just going to say, I completely agree. In my short time as also a peer review editor, I would look a little bit at the abstract, but mainly I would be focusing on the main paper, because a lot of the journals have very limited word count for abstracts. And so the authors often don't know what's important to mention in the abstract, what's not. And really what's important is in the paper. So it's better to read the paper and, okay, have a look at the abstract if you want. But yeah, I agree with Veronique.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, we'll move on to the next question. So as we've heard from the last couple of fantastic days, misinformation can really be accelerated or stem from the publish or perish culture in science. So from conclusions that aren't carefully interrogated, peer review that isn't thorough, or maybe stats that aren't checked carefully. So when it comes to misinformation, where do you feel a manuscript editor's responsibility lies compared with a peer review editor's responsibility?
In fact, the past couple of days have been really encouraging, because initially when Mary and I discussed this topic, I wondered, but what role a copywriter really has to play in terms of scientific misinformation integrity. But I'm so glad that past 2 days they have satisfied me, yes, that copy editor too has a role. Now, take for instance today's morning presentations about ORCID ID. Now, some journals insist that authors do supply their ORCID IDs, but what if it's not supplied? So that's a simple step that a copy editor does check, that yes, as per the journal's requirements, ORCID ID has not been supplied. Going beyond that, and it's as was mentioned, that copywriters also need to check whether the text and the data that really match. Or even in some cases, I remember asking authors that, look, you have this very elaborate table, but do you really need it? Because you are saying almost the same thing in text, and you could just present this as a supplementary information. We don't really need such an elaborate table because you are saying all about it in text, so long as it matches. But there have also been instances where copy editors have caught this, that, for instance, the sample size total number n is equal to whatever 150 in the table, but the text is something else. So these are sometimes telltale signs whether the data have been just copied and pasted from some other source. And these are again red flags. The same thing with the references. I mean, if you find that either there are too many self-citations, or suddenly you see an disproportionately large references referring to only 1 or 2 years, that is again a red flag, but that a copywriter does notice if you scrutinize the way references are given. So I would say, yes, these are the ways in which we contribute to ensuring a paper's integrity.
And you think that's a manuscript editor's responsibility and not a peer review editor?
Certainly not.
Okay, interesting. Veronique, would you agree?
I may disagree.
Oh.
Well, so yeah, this is a very, very interesting and very complex topic. I think, of course, you know, the first and foremost, the responsibility is, of course, with the authors, right? They should ensure that they provide accurate and transparent information in the paper. But we peer review editors do have also an important role to play. First, to help the authors, right? Because they're, you know, very focused on their research. They don't publish papers every day. So I think they need here our help to guide them to make the paper as, you know, accurate and transparent as possible. So we have, for example, I'm talking here about our portfolio of journals, and it might be different in others, but for example, we have reporting checklists that we share with the authors that they should submit with their submission, with their manuscript, that guides them towards which details should be included in the paper and what they should double check before submission. We also ask them to make all data available from the first submission. And this also contributes in making the work, you know, the reporting transparent and the research, of course, reproducible. But then, of course, we have, and this is when I said I may disagree with that, we do have, I think, a responsibility to check, you know, to do some checks. We trust, of course, the authors. We're not here to, you know, play the police, but we need to make sure that that the papers are, you know, that they are not mistakes, that they are not, you know, defects in the reporting of the science that would then lead eventually to misinformation of the reader. And for that, I think we have the responsibility to recruit experts in the fields of research that are concerned by the paper and have them check, you know, that first the science was done, that the experiments were done properly, that it's properly reported, and that all the claims are supported by the data in the paper. And of course, the system is not perfect, right? Sometimes there are also, you know, honest mistakes honest errors that can just slip through. And a paper is published with what in the end could be considered, you know, misinformation, mistakes. And there are responsibilities, of course, to have the scientific records corrected. And so to take every concern that is being brought up by readers or by the authors themselves that may spot errors later on and make sure these are corrected.
Okay, you mentioned data availability, and I know there's been some discussion about that. I think Jane mentioned in the research integrity session that there's a tension between open data and data availability and secure research. So what do you do when an author doesn't want to provide, you know, a data availability statement or something like that?
So in our, it's a very complicated issue, and we're of course having very complicated cases sometimes. So our policy is that we mandate data deposition. So we ask that all authors make the data available, and this is a requirement for acceptance. They are, of course, sensitive data, right? There are also issues with, you know, with papers coming from big companies such as Google, for example, and the issue of sharing the code. These are very tricky issues that are handled, you know, by we have specialized teams. You know, of course, we have our editors in chief, and then teams of experts that then deal with these specific cases. But as a base policy, let's say, we ask for all data to be made available, and we push authors. We don't accept papers before this is the case, as a general rule.
Okay, taking us slightly off topic for my own interest, but Alaya, you want to bring us back on track?
Well, on who's responsible, probably
Yes.
here, I guess, everyone in a way. I mean, we have the opportunity as before submission, make sure that the paper is as clear as possible. The language, as Nicolene mentioned, it's very important that the language is as clear as it cannot be interpreted in different ways. It cannot be misrepresented I mean, you can not avoid that 100%, but you can try to minimize the risk for that. So make it as clear as possible. Then at the peer review process, obviously there's also a whole bunch of process that will guarantee, or at least try to guarantee, that everything is reported as accurately as possible. And then also the post-acceptance editing in some journals that have the privilege to have it. That's when the errors that can fall through the gaps, we know that. And in the end, the red flags that were mentioned by Dan and Ines were very helpful as well, because you might not see them, but you might miss some of them in the whole process and arrive to the acceptance. And there's still some things that might, it does happen. From your experience in the post-acceptance editing team, it does happen quite a lot that suddenly an assistant editor will flag some things like, hey, there's something a bit weird here. And then you can investigate and find out, and maybe change the paper, etc. So I think we have the opportunity at all those stages to actually tackle the misinformation. So yeah, as a conclusion, we all can do something. Yeah.
Okay. And for those of you who are authors in the audience, I'm quite keen to hear where you think your responsibilities lie at the end of this session.
I forgot something as well. What I wanted to say as a pre-submission help for some authors is that often, as as we mentioned, some authors might be very focused or tunnel vision on their research only, and it's not, as we said as well, it's not intentional, but they might word things in ways that might not be as objective as as they can. So I think having an editor who has experience in so many different fields and comes from a distance and an objective point of view really helps, because then you read the paper and say, okay, this could be interpreted in a different way. We need to make it very clear. This could be used for this and that. So I think having the kind of the distance really helps as well.
Yeah, I agree. Fantastic. Okay, so we'll move on. So what are some ways editors can build trust with authors, especially first-time authors who may be anxious about the editing process? Who'd like to take it away?
Yeah. In fact, that's a good question, because when authors send their manuscript for the first time to an editor, I'm talking of pre-submission, they don't really know what they are going to expect. I remember that when I started copy editing, that was before the era of computers, so it was all hard copy editing in red ink. And I was working as an in-house editor, and I heard these comments that when the manuscript goes to Mr. Joshi, it comes back soaked in blood. So it's something that authors may not be really prepared for, such intrusive editing. Or authors also are not too sure what value the editor is going to add. So what I do is, if the author approaches me for the first time, and I'm not too sure whether I'll be able to do justice to that manuscript because of the subject, then I say, all right, I will edit the abstract of your paper. That's typically around 300 words, not such a great deal of investment of time. And I'll edit it for you, send it back to you. Now, if you are happy with that, we'll go ahead. If you're not happy with that, it's just pro bono. But that helps me win the author's trust. And in turn, the author gets some idea of what's going to be done to their manuscript. So that is something that editors can do to build trust. And one other related point, in fact, if you remember on the inaugural day, there was this beautiful talk about misconceptions. And the speaker made a point that misconceptions, simply because they are presented more powerfully, they make an impact. And if you remember the video that was shown, and the scientists were just mumbling and not giving a clear message. So that's another aspect where manuscript editors can help. That is, they can see that it's worded more emphatically, of course, within the constraints of the data, but just so that a good message is delivered as powerfully as possible.
Okay, fantastic.
I agree with that. I think I had never thought about sending like a sample of edits, which is a really good idea to give them an idea. We did consider that at the Lancet, because that authors would be expected to know like what kind of editing we do, but like it was a bit controversial. We didn't know whether to do it or scare them or not, you know, in a way. But I like it. And I also think what's important to build trust is the communication and also the explanation of why you've changed things, you know, because sometimes it can, you know, you might change some, as we discussed before, some emotional language that, you know, just explain, okay, this is why I've changed this, because they might take it really personally as well. Try to explain why you've changed it to make it clear, to make it more objective, to make sure that it's not interpreted in different ways. So the communication and the explanation, I think, is the most important for me. And also maybe communicate the process, not only of what you're doing, but also what to expect. As we said, all journals have different processes for peer review, for everything. So get the authors prepared in advance. I think it really helps.
Okay, and how do you get them to read that acceptance email so they know what's going to happen? Because that's what I find to be a problem.
Yeah, you tell them. You explain to them in talk, you know, like no, it's true, they won't read the whole thing. It's too long. It's too long, definitely.
Veronique, do you have any tips from nature?
So first, I see we have the same problems about reading letters, reading long letters. But yeah, I think, you know, my answer is the same. You know, it's communication. So first, you know, we need to be transparent and be available to explain to authors, you know, the specificities of our own journals. You know, to also try to dispel misconceptions, you know, at events.
Oh, I think we've frozen.
It's already like Friday morning, and
Oh, no, lucky.
Oh, we have lost.
That's all right. Okay, fine.
Hello?
Oh, hi.
Hi, I'm back.
You
Yeah,
are.
froze.
Where did I stop?
That's a great question. Beautiful. Thank you. Hassy.
The acceptance letter
Okay, so yes.
at the beginning.
I said quite a few sentences after that.
Oh, communication.
So
And again.
yes. Yeah, so I was saying that first, you know, it's we need as editors to go out there and explain, you know, our editorial processes and try to break all the misconceptions that there may be. We can't expect authors to understand and know everything just from our website. I think here we, you know, we have a role to play to you know, be open and communicate with authors. And authors also need to know that they can reach out to us, right? They can send us pre-submission inquiries, for example, before they even write the paper, to you know, ask if the paper would fit the scope of the journal, and maybe we can give them also first feedback. And you know, this can be done formally through our submission systems, but this can also be very informal by approaching editors at conferences or dropping an email and asking for a phone call. We might not be able, of course, to take all of those you know, calls and requests, but we are generally discuss, and I think it's important for authors, if they have questions, to feel free to also approach us with these questions instead of, you know, then submitting a paper, you know, with ideas, wrong ideas in mind, or wrong expectations.
I feel like it might be a balance of inviting that conversation, but also setting some expectations about how available you really are because I think not all of us have capacity to field all of those queries. Am I right? How do we deal with that?
Totally. I second that, because very often first time also they ask me, all right, so we would like to submit a manuscript for your editing. Please give us your telephone number. So I said, no, I will deal with you only through email. And there has never been any occasion where I'm required to take a phone call from the author. All that I have to say, I will say it on my file. There will be comments, there will be highlights, and you respond to that.
Yeah, I think a fair few of us have taken our phone numbers off our email signatures. I'm not going to lie. But you always have my email address. That's fine. Alaya, was there anything else you wanted to add?
No, I was just curious, but Veronique, what it is like also the same, because I guess you must be very busy as an editor at Nature. How often do you get phone calls from authors? Because I've encouraged some authors to contact the editors to find out before submitting, but I'm also worried that you might not have time, to answer all those queries. So what's your availability, you think, in these kind of situations?
Yes, it's very tricky, because to be honest, I much prefer also talking to the people directly instead of just sending emails all day long. But as you say, we're very busy. We handle so many manuscripts every day that we don't have the capacity to take all these calls. So I mean, like with everything, prioritize and see. There are some questions, some requests that we can actually easily answer via email. And in this case, of course, we do it via email. But then in other cases, it's actually easier, faster, and just nicer to take a call. But yeah, we can't take all of them. We have to keep them short, and this is unfortunate, but this is the reality, unfortunately. Yeah.
Okay, lots of communication. I like it. My next question, I feel like will be very difficult to answer without using two letters that have come up a fair bit, but we'll see how we go. What emerging trends in manuscript editing should authors be aware of that could influence their writing or submission process? Now, if you can avoid saying AI, that would be impressive.
I was going to mention AI.
Please go for it.
No, but because it's the most direct.
Yes.
Of course, in our world, this is really important. And we've discussed this, for the past 2 days, like how important it is and how breaking it is for like the opportunity to people from countries whose English is not the first language to be able to write finally a manuscript to the level that they wish, to write. And so it's great. It can really open doors and really help people in terms of writing the manuscript. And as we've discussed, that's, it's more like the language. It would be very helpful in that way, but it's discouraged to use, for all the other
Analysis,
aspects, interpretation, and all of that, of course. One thing that I kind of have tried, and I wonder, and I would bring it up to the room here and let me know what you think, because we've discussed a little bit that it's like sometimes authors ask me, what journal should I submit my paper to? And so I've used this to just go, okay, as we said, don't put the paper in the system because we've already discussed confidentiality issues. But you can say, can you send me a list of journals that have published papers? I have a paper, like observational study, single center, one country, about malnutrition or whatever, and what paper would have in the aims and scope, what journal has published these kind of papers, and then give me a list with like characteristics of each journal, etc. And it's quite good in terms of that kind of search engine kind of way overall to be able to come up with a list, an initial list. And as we've said, this is an initial list. As anything that comes out of there, you have to then manually check.
Be critical.
Be critical, manually check, and obviously it's not going to be, there's going to be some journals in the process that some journals will be missed. But at least the initial list that is checked, then you can use, the think, check, submit checklist, for example, that was discussed in the previous sentence by Sophie, or you can, and, I know like Elsevier or other publishers do have this kind of opportunities, like they have this kind of software where you can actually say which journal should I submit. But if you want to have a little bit more of an, global idea of journals, maybe it's a solution, maybe not a solution, but at least, a tool.
A guiding.
That could be helpful.
Okay.
Yeah, I was thinking maybe that.
In fact, I can add a couple of ideas
Please.
to that about the question of choosing the journal.
Yeah.
So one is that most major publishers also have a website where you can paste the title and the abstract of your paper, and you get suggestions. Of course, those suggestions will be limited to that publisher's output. But in addition to that, I suggest to my authors, you can do two more things. If you have a provisional title of your manuscript, just go to Google Scholar, paste that title in Google Scholar, and look at the results and see which journals feature more frequently in that list. That is one. The other thing is look at your list of references. If you can find that one or two journals crop up more frequently in your list of references, that could be a way out, because if you have found it worthwhile to cite papers published in those journals, maybe chances are that those journals will also find it worthwhile to cite your papers.
I like that we've got a mix of manual and you know, technological solutions here. Veronique, have you got any other suggestions?
Yes, so I mean, I'm sorry, actually, I'm going back to AI and
That's fine.
and you know, big data. I think here what I would want to say, so it's, you know, it's a different, I see things, of course, at a different stage, so post submission. I think here we do have, you know, of course, we do need to adapt to this new age. I'm thinking more here about from the perspective of making this data available and also reviewing all of this data, right? So you end up with papers, for example, with very complicated codes, and we have, as journals, a responsibility to have them reviewed by reviewers, and also of ultimately making them available. And we need to help with that. So, for example, the Nature Portfolio has partnered with Code Ocean, so to offer a platform for others to share the code and also for reviewers to review code more easily. So this is one example, you know, of an initiative of how we adapt our processes as well to the changing type of research that we receive. And we'll have to keep doing that, you know, in the years and decades.
Yeah, I think it's going to be up to editors to keep pace with what's happening. We can't just sit back. Okay, fantastic. Before I open it up for questions, is there anything else that you would like to discuss?
You made our job impossible because you said we have to talk about emerging trends, but without mentioning.
No, I just said if it was possible, I would be impressed, but please take it.
No, so I was tempted to say pass. So, but I would like to add a couple more point about building trust about authors. That's one other thing that I do is, now typically I edit manuscript in Microsoft Word using track changes, but I typically send authors two versions. In one file, I say accept all changes and suggest to the author that this is the version that they should work on. And I also enclose the other version which shows every change that's made to the manuscript, saying that this is the version of record. So you please focus on the all changes accepted file. There are comments and there are highlights where I have not been too sure about whether changes are right. And the other version is the version of record. So at any time you want to check, then that is the file to be referred to. So that helps also build trust.
Yeah, I agree. I think the post acceptance team that I work with, we don't necessarily highlight every minor, you know, spelling correction or something like that. But if it's been a restructuring of a sentence, or we're trying to clarify what the person is trying to say, then we will flag that with an author query, like you would do as well.
And also explains.
Yes, sorry, of course.
You often explain as well.
Yes.
Why you made some changes.
Yes, at length. But yeah. Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much, panel. I'm going to open it up to questions. Do we have any? I can. What do I need to do?
Oh, sorry.
Catherine, please take it away. You're able to speak.
Oh, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
I can indeed.
Oh, wonderful. Listen, thanks so much for a great panel. It's been really, really interesting. So first of all, and I had a question about the in-depth language edit that has been spoken about quite a bit. And I wondered if the panel have a view on whether like when in the submission process is the best time to do that in-depth language edit? Is it pre-acceptance or post-acceptance? For our journal, we're quite small, but we're lucky that we do have paid language editors who can do it post-acceptance. And we do that so that the scientific editors can really focus on the substance, as I think has been talked about quite a bit already. But we do have some authors who really have the expectation that once their paper is accepted, there's no other changes. That's essentially their version of record. And they can get a little bit upset when the manuscript comes back with lots of suggested linguistic changes and checks for consistency. So I'd love to hear if the panel kind of have an overview of like a joint view of whether or not post-acceptance language editing is the best time to do it.
Who'd like to start? I'm biased, so I'll tap out of this one.
I would say I don't have the answer when is the best moment. I understand and I agree that it can be a problem to do the post-acceptance edits, because at that moment the authors have already a headache after the peer review, the revisions and everything, and suddenly this comes and it feels like the last. And I guess in journals that have that, what I've seen that tends to happen is also at peer review, they try to focus only on the substantive and try not to, give them too much of a headache in terms of language, because they know there's going to be the post-acceptance. And I think maybe the answer here is, again, communication. Make it very clear that during the peer review, we're only going to be looking at general data, interpretation kind of changes, and that later on we're going to be looking at specific sentences. But I do see the value in the post-acceptance because of that, because like this, you can focus on the peer review side and not do too much. On the other hand, my job is as a pre-submission editor. And I feel like that is, for me, is super important, because you really can see in some papers that I've worked how smooth the process is later on. And I'm trying to make the paper as clear as possible, so the peer review editor will be able to read it and understand straight away what's the importance of the paper, what's the novelty, what's the research question, and then the peer review process would be smoother, I hope, and then the post-acceptance even more smoother, and can only focus on mainly journal style and formatting kind of things. But that's the ideal world for me.
I mean, as a post-acceptance editor, okay, fine, I'll come around, because if I get a paper that's been, written, or you've helped an author to write a paper well in the beginning, it makes my job a lot easier. So, okay, you can carry on.
I sold myself quite well.
Yes, this is true.
Yeah, because as I said, since I don't work for a particular journal apart from ESC, I have no constraints of that sort. It's a matter of the journal's workflow. But I would suggest that language editing, if it's done pre-submission stage, that's so much better. One, because it will help that authors' papers are not rejected solely because of imperfection of language. Two, it will make the reviewer's job easier, because during the language editing, hopefully the text is made more concise and clearer. So to that extent, it is always helps do this pre-submission.
Okay, Veronique?
Yeah, I don't have much to add. I see value in both pre and post. There's arguments for each.
So we have no answer for you, Catherine. I'm sorry.
No, but
Yeah,
the important in the post peer review is that it has changed so much during peer review that it's really important to have another pair of eyes to check it really carefully.
Please.
Sorry, don't mean to invade your territory, but we used to have
Sorry, would you mind stating your name and where you're from, just for everyone online?
My name's Rachel Bennett, and I'm one of the editors-in-chief of Veterinary Anaesthesia and Analgesia, which is a society-owned journal, but the publisher is Alcevia. And we changed publisher or changed submission platform several years ago. The former platform had a paragraph in it that said a manuscript was accepted subject to editing. We don't have that anymore, but at least it clarified that the authors might anticipate some changes after acceptance. So I was just going to explain. We don't have that anymore, unfortunately. Once they're accepted, they go straight to production. But at least it sort of gives them the idea that things might change. What it did do.
Yes, we have something similar in our Lancet accept email that says your paper will be edited to our strict in-house style. But again, I think I mentioned earlier, it's whether they read that email that really impacts how they react to the edit afterwards. We have another question.
Hello, I'm Hasib Irfanullah. I'm an independent consultant from Bangladesh. Now, thank you very much, panel, for the discussion that we have been hearing. There are some estimates that, if I consider those estimates, since the beginning of this panel, almost 500 research has already been published, because every 6 seconds, a publication is done. But the amount of effort we are talking about, the cost, is huge if we want to maintain that. Are we really talking about the growth of scholarly publishing? Because otherwise you can't actually maintain that. So we need to go down to make the quality better. What's your take on that? Thank you.
So how do we do this at scale with the growth of publishing?
Difficult. Do you have a...
I think the only way it can be done is we have to use AI.
I think we need to train. I think we've got to train our researchers, train our students, be delivering courses.
Yeah, but then he's talking about speed.
Yes. Sorry. Yeah. I'm just going to call Anita. We have Anita online. Could you, Anita, please go ahead.
Hi.
Hi, Anita.
Hi, I'm Anita Nagarajan from India. I'm a communications and editing consultant. So I work as a freelance manuscript editor. My question is about editing, the scope of a manuscript editor's intervention when they suspect the use of generative AI in writing a paper. So if I, just like all the panelists mentioned, we receive papers that have already been accepted sometimes, and sometimes pre-submission for editing. If I suspect or think that generative AI may have been used for writing the paper, what do you suggest is a good way of bringing this to the attention of the author? Do you think that this step of flagging this potential concern to the author falls within the manuscript editor's scope of work, either now or in the future? Thank you.
I'll put my blinkers on and say that when I get a manuscript to edit, that is my job, is to edit it. Now, how it has reached that stage is not really my business. It doesn't matter to me whether the author has sought help from AI. Maybe if the author has, maybe my job would be easier. But that I really don't see as my concern. I will work on the manuscript as I get it.
I would make sure that they have declared it. I would probably tell them if I suspect
that comes later. Yes.
Yeah. And I would probably, if I see something that is clearly written by AI, I would first ask the authors if they have used AI to write this, and I would probably then rewrite it in a way that I feel is a little bit more human. But yeah, if it's only for language, I wouldn't be too concerned if it's, authors from for whom English is not the first language, and it's, say, in the introduction kind of section, and it hasn't been used to completely write the introduction, but more about writing sentences. It's all about asking how they used it, and you can really see, nowadays you can really see when it's something completely written, but soon you won't be able to see it, I think. So
okay, so you think the conversation with the author does lie with the manuscript editor, I would say. Okay. We have 2 more questions in the room. We might have time for one, but we'll see how we go.
Okay, thank you. I'm Pertti Salonen from the Finnish Medical Journal. I'm the co-editor-in-chief. And this is a comment and maybe a question too. To my opinion, the manuscript editors too often come to me and ask, there's something in the figures or tables or something I don't understand. And I'm certainly not blaming the manuscript editor, but myself. Because if there are some discrepancies and odd things going through peer review and my publication decision, I think I have failed. So the manuscript editors, the system is a very important double check system, to my opinion. And maybe you want to comment on that?
I agree. No, I think that what I often say as well is if I don't understand it, probably somebody else who is not used to reading these kind of papers also don't understand it. So I think it's a kind of as well an extra eye to make sure that everything is as clear as possible for anyone to read a paper and understand it more or less. You know, you don't have to understand the analysis done or something like this, but at least have an idea of what they did and what they're trying to say. So, but I think you shouldn't see it as a failure from your side either, because everyone is never going to be perfect. There's always going to be things that we pick up after acceptance as well. So
also, there's something more. It's not just about not being able to understand the figure. That's, of course, a higher level. But because the authors are so familiar with their data that when they see a figure, they already know what the figure is telling them. Whereas it may not be clear to the reader at all. I mean, there could be, I remember a figure in which the magnitude was expressed as the length of a line, but the differences were millimetric. So I said to the author, look, this figure doesn't make sense because no reader is going to be able to judge what is larger and what is smaller when the difference is so small. Or it could be simply issues of readability, issues of contrast, where the background and foreground is not clear enough. So that's also a matter of concern.
I'd say team effort all round. Joan.
I want to get on camera.
Oh, please.
I'm on camera. Hello, everybody. And hello the side of the room, because I've been hiding over there. So I'm Joan Marsh. I was president of EASE. When I went, this is not a question for the panel, so I'm butting in, but it's very relevant to what Ashley just said. So when I went to my first EASE conference in 1989, there was a session on training editors to train authors. It was a train the trainer session. And I thought, oh, what a good idea. Let's go out there and teach our authors to write properly, and then we won't have any work to do. And then 3 years later, I went to my next EASE conference, because they were every 3 years then. And we had another workshop and we said the same thing. And I thought, oh dear, this isn't really happening, is it? So I then started thinking I better do some author workshops myself, which I started to do. And it's a great thing because I went lots and lots of lovely countries doing that. We'd rather drop that off in EASE. So my reason I'm standing up here, touching the microphone, is Ashley said, we either say use AI to train it and give up, or as editors, we say we're going to go out there and teach our authors. So if we're doing that, who would be interested in a train the trainers session on developing and running author writing workshops?
yeah, I mean, I would be.
That's a few. Okay. And those of you online. So I think we'll put it in the strategy and we'll think about developing it, and we'll get back to you. Okay. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Joan. We'll wrap up this session. Thank you so much to my panelists. For those of you online, please do come to Gathertown to ask our panelists any questions in the lunch break. And for those of you who are authors, I really want to hear where you think your responsibilities lie when it comes to misinformation. So thank you very much.